hit the button, and that
Yes.
works. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Although, that's what
They've
I
they've
really
improved.
like to have documentation sometime.
Yeah. Well, they've improved the process and it's seamless. If you look at it that way, you don't have to fool with a lot of stuff. You just
Yeah.
click and go. So.
Yeah, but they could have said that, okay, because I had 8 different things I could have done, and I tried them all and it didn't work, and finally this worked with your help, right?
Yeah. Well, I had to research it and play around with it. You're
Right.
live now on YouTube. Yay.
We are live on YouTube, and so welcome to our YouTube audience, and we are we're going to have a talk from Dr. Tamara Russell. But before we do that, since we're on YouTube, I want to mention a couple of things. One, if you are interested in joining one of our webinars as a panelist, please write access at globalcheckin.blog, B-L-O-G, access at globalcheckin.blog, and we will get you set up to be a panelist. And just to mention our coming attractions here, on Thursday, we are going to have Dr. Liliana Wabha from Sao Paulo is going to talk to us about an imagination for evil, which should be quite interesting. And then on Sunday Australia time, and Sunday Southeast Asia time, we're going to have Nicole, who comes to us as the love doctor, who's going to tell her story, which I've been hearing over the last 6 months in bits and pieces. So it's quite a remarkable story, and I urge you to join us. That will be at 10 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. It's noon in Australia and 10 a.m. in Singapore, and 7:30 in the morning in India for Khushbu. And then on Sunday at 11 a.m., going back to our previous scheduled time, we're going to have Dr. Darian Pictet, who is from Zurich, and she's going to be talking to us about movements of the soul in the Red Book is her essay. Both of those doctors wrote in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. On Tuesday, 1 week from today, at this time, I've had my invitation accepted by Rabbi Stephen Fuchs. Rabbi Fuchs is my classmate and fraternity brother from Hamilton College, and he is the former president of the World Union of Progressive Jews, which is a group of about 1.6 million Jews around the world. And he is a distinguished alumnus from Vanderbilt University's Divinity School, and so he tried to retire. He had a congregation in Hartford, Connecticut for many years, but he tried to retire, and he moved to Florida and ended up having to become the rabbi of a congregation in Florida. So now he's doing that. And Rabbi Fuchs has developed a close relationship with some Christian pastors in Germany, especially. And for about the last 5 years, he's made annual trips to Germany um, as a healing process, and has been invited to um, speak in many Christian pulpits around Germany over the last 5 years. And so he is the author of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And I'm sorry, no, he is, connect my brain here. Rabbi Fuchs is the author of Finding Ourselves in Biblical Narratives. Okay, so the full title is What's in It for Me? Finding Ourselves in Biblical Narratives. And that entire book, Steve allowed me to publish online on on another YouTube or another website, which is called Jung.guru. And it's so the whole book is there. I will put a link to the whole book in both the chat on the Zoom and the chat on the YouTube, so that everybody can go and find that book and read it. It's a profound book in many ways, and you'd think he'd been studying Dr. Jung's work for many years, which he never did, but he got there himself. And maybe Steve will tell some stories out of school about Skip. You never know. And then I've invited another of our classmates, Mike Berkowitz, to come on next Thursday, and I think he will, but he hasn't definitely confirmed yet. But Mike and I have been close friends for many years, and Mike, among other things, writes all the alumni information about my class for our regular monthly newsletter of Hamilton. So he knows lots of stories about me from long ago, and we have our own story together for many years. And so that will probably be interesting to many of you. And I'm going to let him just have at it. But anyway, Tamara, this is for you today, and this is part 2 of our discussion with you. And I wanted to, before I let anybody else in, I wanted you to go back and address one thing that I picked up early in your last appearance, and that was the suggestion of ongoing healing and the necessity for that. And I think a lot of people, whether they're raising money for a startup business or whether they're healing their psyche, think that it's one and done. Okay. In other words, if I have a problem, I go to a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist and I work it out. And as one of Dr. Jung's patients came to him and said, I'll see you 10 times and that's all I need, and then it'll be over. And that's exactly what she did. She came and saw him 10 times. And at the end of that 10 times, it was in fact over. And she was healed. But I wonder if you'd address that issue for us first as a follow-on to the other day.
Yeah, thank you, and good to see everybody again. Thank you so much for this second opportunity, and already been some rich discussions. And I suppose for me, it really is a journey, and sometimes I'm having these discussions with interdisciplinary colleagues around almost kind of like the Buddhist versus the Jungian perspective on this. Do we do the shamatha training and carry out the steps and the stages and reach the goals and go to the next level, with an idea that there is an end point somewhere up there, over there, in there, that's called enlightenment or inner peace. versus this idea that actually we're in this continually evolving spiral that, in my view, really must be context and kind of an embodied cognitive journey that means that we're constantly feeding our brain and our psyche with new information that actually means the journey is never really done. I know we have a child psychologist here, so we might also think about age and stage of development and different sorts of healing tasks that might be required at age 5 or 12 or 20 or after giving birth or becoming a grandmother or a grandfather. The dynamical changing nature of relationships from my perspective and experience means of course that there are new challenges when the levers shift a little bit. And it is often these generational relationships that we were already dialoguing a little bit about that often prompt the most searing growth points. And my sense at the moment now is with people in lockdown, many of them in family homes, some of them in their childhood bedrooms at the age of 45 or 40 years old. People are really having this opportunity to revisit childhood shadow, and that might include some pretty interesting and difficult and challenging conversations with parents, with siblings, with grandparents. Even just the very fact that you're in a childhood bedroom from an extended and embodied cognition perspective means that your brain is getting prompted to revisit old psychic habits that it may be left behind in the flat that you've got in the city or in your own independent accommodation. So it's fascinating to me. Again, my personal experience was I went to my auntie's house initially before coming here to this empty farmhouse where I am now. And this was a place where I spent some of my teenage years, partly because I was getting into trouble and my auntie was the one that was tasked with getting me back on the straight and narrow. And this was the place where I had to knuckle down for my exams, and she helped me to get through those things. So, it was an interesting experience to be there again as an adult, and as an adult who's also in this process of finding out how can I be my true self in this post-COVID world, and what does that process of transformation look and feel like, particularly when it might be around breaking free of some of the chains and the shackles of systems of family, systems of education, professional systems that have a bit of this sort of yang rigidity about them, when actually, what I feel and sense is happening now is the rise of the yin, the rise of the feminine, this call to women of all ages to really try to be thoughtful about what would a world look and feel like if the yin-yang rotation happens, and we have this shift in the power dynamic. And these are conversations I'm actually having in many places with my patients, with colleagues, with friends, with family members. And it's tricky and it's sensitive actually, because, we have this duality of the yin and the yang, the male and the female, in our society, and certain cultures it's particularly pronounced, and let's recognize that across the world those dynamics are different as well. But even in the places and spaces in the world where it can look quite equal, the subtleties and the nuance of the yang power dynamic over the yin, I think is worthy of a mindful, gentle, kind lens of attention and inquiry. And, for me, the idea of lip service during change processes is something that I get quite activated about, because that's actually almost worse than no change. And it's more difficult to have those conversations with people that are saying, yeah, but we've got all these programs for women, and we've got all these things that we're doing for women. And I've got daughters, and, you know, we're doing these things for women. And yet maybe there's a need there to say, well, you know, actually, the job's only half done, and it's not enough. And, you know, you need to ask 2 times or 3 times or 4 times to allow the voice that was in the lower power dynamic to actually feel safe and comfortable to say what they really need to say or what they really want to say. So in answer to the question about journeys, I think the journey is ongoing. And, you know, I'd be a little bit provocative just to get the debate going, but this comment about, you know, I just only needed to go to therapy once or twice or 10 times, it has this kind of problem-solving quality to it, which is something that the, you know, the yang mind really kind of likes. Yeah, this is often in the family work some of the issue. You know, there's this thing like we need to solve this emotional problem. We need to solve this mental illness. And what do I need to do to get this sorted? And the more yin style of that is, well, this is an emerging, evolving conversation. And I might need to circle round and revisit it several times before I actually come to settle into a new way of being that feels like I've made a embodied and kind of heartfelt solution to this problem. And, you know, to say, I really believe we have yin and yang inside all of us. But I'm often curious about the way that men and women approach therapy and how they use therapy and what their expectations are around the healing process and the healing journey and how it's done. And I see that CBT book there, which, you know, for me, that's actually quite a yang style of therapy. And here in the UK, it's kind of gone a bit too far, which is you can have 6 sessions and you have to fill in these outcome measures. And we know that you're done because you've dropped 4 scores on the PHQ scale of depression. But, you know, you can be a therapist sitting there going, this person isn't done. This person needs more. This person was just opening up. But according to the model, we're done and they're healed. Now, maybe the psychoanalysts and perhaps the Jungians take it a bit too far the other way. You know, they're right into the maternal of the attachment system and you're there in your therapy process for 10, 20 years. I think there's a middle way, probably.
Sandy has her hand up. Let me say.
Well, I was just gonna add that I do feel like it does give the patient or even the person it's like you're handing them a defense when you say, okay, you did the 10 sessions. So the function of that structure, it almost like takes the weight off of the superego, you know, like I did the work, I can now move on. Like it's like a kind of it's a cognitive behavioral thing, just to even say you're going to do this for 10 sessions. Just like when Skip was mentioning, you know, my wife and I, when after an argument's over, we never bring it up, and that works for us. And that's a cognitive behavioral task that they have agreed to doing. But, you know, there's going to be more to it, and maybe other ways that they have to self-regulate to communicate. And you're right. I mean, the analysts can go off into a whole nother tangent, but also I think the psyche doesn't want to dive in. So they want to keep it at the cognitive level. And that is the idea that we have 10 sessions, we have 20 sessions, and here's your certificate, you graduated. And that does feel good. And that is a defense that you're handing to the patient, which they might need at that first stage. But I know what you're saying. It's the dialogue is going to be ongoing.
Well, and again, I want to really be clear that I'm honoring the yin and yang in everyone and in everything. But I'll preface, some comments that might sound like I don't, but, in the spirit of open dialogue, in the spirit of let's churn some of these more problematic things. And I guess one of the things that I notice or suspect might be happening in this, it's not quite lip service or the more cognocentric, it is a defense against going to the more difficult emotions, usually that are there, of guilt and shame. And so in this rotation of the yin and the yang, when somebody that was in a power dynamic that has collectively had some pretty abusive properties in terms of subjugation of the feminine, in small ways and large, when that position shifts and there's the letting go of the power, there's the releasing of the position of hierarchy. In the letting go, we reveal the habits, we reveal the unskillful intentions. Now, in a mindfulness practice, for me, that's like I've got a pattern or a habit in my mind that's serving as a defense against an emotion. And when I release it, I can see some of the underlying origins of the habit, and it reveals the emotion. And, if the emotion is guilt or shame or something difficult to hold, we don't want to look at it, right? We zip back into the habit, or we distract, or, drugs and alcohol can be part of that process. But actually the feel to heal language is about saying, spot the cognitive pattern, release from it, and then sink your awareness into those difficult and problematic emotions, which are probably being expressed in the body. So this is why this kind of cognocentric therapies, I think, often are doing some people a disservice, because it keeps the healing in the head. And from my perspective, including my own journey with Kung Fu and martial arts, it's the healing in the body, it's the feeling in the body that will really allow us to have the capacity to hold strong emotions in ourselves and for others. So the male shifting to the yin position and the yin shifting to the yang, we've got different healing tasks, actually. This is why I understand that the healing task for the yang is guilt and shame. And I'm very pleased. I love listening to the Minnesota Men's Group lectures on YouTube. They're really fantastic if you're not connected to those Jungians. Lots of males discussing, men's group stuff, and the reemergence of men's group in our society, I think, is a fantastic thing to allow men who are willing to go to this sensitive material to have conversations about guilt and shame, individual, personal, collective. I was on a call with somebody the other day, and he was saying, well, I need to point this out to the senior leadership, that actually it's our processes that have, mucked this up. And no one's going to want to look at that. And this is it's a business, it's an industry where their work is doing the programming to catch pedophiles on the deep web. Right? So this is serious business. And so I said to the guy, well, okay,
catching pedophiles on what? What was it, Tamara?
On the dark web.
Oh, okay.
So, they're programmers, they're technical people, maybe some of them with this kind of special minds that we talked about last time that can really churn the programming and the data. But there was an issue that had caused issues. And there was a need for some courage, actually, to step up and say, well, actually, part of the problem was our own processes. We can easily scapegoat the project manager that left, easy to do that. Yeah, that's a quick defensive maneuver when we're dealing with shame and looking at our own culpability. But we had this dialogue, which was like, okay, but what is the experience of this individual? Yeah, I didn't do something right. Our process wasn't working well. Versus the experience of the children that this work is about. right? And again, I got a bit like activated myself. I felt some of that righteous feminine anger coming up where I was thinking, listen, you can deal with some friggin' shame and guilt because we're talking about mass abuse of children and sex trafficking and selling children on the internet. And what is the experience of those individuals around shame? So I don't want to hear about your shame that you got a process wrong and not being able to dive into it. But I do recognize that in the yang culture, in the macho culture, this is a difficult task. And this is why male suicide is one of the main killers of men, certainly in the West, above all kinds of other health problems. And the fact that that's not on the front of the newspapers is also an indicator of the level of the difficulty we have dealing with these kinds of conversations, and why I think men's groups are very important next evolution.
Define what the killer of men is. Say that again. You say this is one of the main killers of men. Would you say it again?
Yeah, I mean, maybe someone can quickly Google the stats, but just to make sure it's correct.
That's correct. Suicide, yeah, correct. It is correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Suicide.
So suicide is one of the largest killers of men. I think age 40 to 47. There's some sort of age bracket. It's not coronary. It's not heart attacks. It's not car accidents. It's not all the things that we think it would be. It is actually suicide.
Well, there's 22 veterans a day committing suicide in the United States. And when I was on active duty in the Marine Corps, which is now 40 years ago, even at that time, we were losing 800 Marines a year to automobile accidents. Okay, especially when the guys would leave on a weekend furlough to go home, and they'd swoop from Jacksonville, North Carolina to New York City and back in a weekend, and go party most of the time in between, right? and that has always been a big shadow in the service. That so anyway, we could talk about that because it's very near and dear to my heart. And
why is that, Skip? Why are they, in your opinion, why are they?
Well, all right, if we want to diverge to that, do you mind, Tamara, for a minute? Okay. All right, so in terms of the automobile accidents, I think that, young Marines are typically in the 18 or 19-year-old age group, so they are not fully matured yet. Okay, they're very macho. They might have been a football hero in high school or something like that. So they might be very macho, but they haven't learned to control their energies very well. And so, they're still into this party mode. It's kind of like the young guy on the beach in Palm Beach recently, who said, I don't care what happens to anybody else. I just want to go party. So too bad that I'm going to carry coronavirus back to other people, right? That's the kind of attitude that young men often have, maybe women too. I don't know. You all would have to tell me that, but young men often say, well, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And even I did that because, I went and not really on a whim, because I knew I was always going to go in the service and serve as an officer. But the fact that I joined the Marines as opposed to any other service was a bit of a whim. And and so, you know, I accepted the risk of going to Vietnam, and 4% of the second lieutenants who went to Vietnam didn't come back alive. Well, I saw I saw a very sobering statistic last night, which is of all the people who have had coronavirus and had a result, either death or recovery, 29% deaths, only 71% recoveries. Okay, that's the of all the Americans who have experienced a final outcome, considered a final outcome from the healthcare point of view, 29% deaths. It's not 1% or 5% or even 12%, which is suggested by Italy and France. We're having the outcomes as of now, you know, and this is a pretty realistic, well, I don't know, worldometers.info is the site, but you know, the final results are 29% end up dead who get this disease. And so a lot of times young men, you know, say, well, I'm invincible, I'm going to go ahead out and take the risk. And what we don't understand is right now, the risk is 29% deaths versus 14 or 4% deaths of second lieutenants in the Vietnam War. Now, in terms of suicides by young veterans, I can say that young men have been brought up on video games, right? And so it's boom, 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 boom. And so it's very aggressive, and you're taking shots at people on the screen, but it's not real life, okay? And these people get into a war zone, and holy cow, his head just got blown off, you know? And, you know, my friend's dying because he's losing blood out of from the leg that just got blown off, that sort of thing. And you face that for 6 or 9 or 12 months or multiple deployments of that, and you know, you see all these young men coming back with this 1,000-yard stare. They go, you know, what, you know, how do you even cope with that? I mean, and, you know, nobody ever offered me PTSD treatment. Unfortunately, I had a very mild case of PTSD myself, but, you know, I still have it and I still suffer from it. And, you know, guys that had a real snootful in battle, you know, they saw a lot of really dastardly stuff, not only their buddies getting killed, but women and children being blown apart and so on. And, you know, how do you cope with that? I mean, yeah, I heard the story of this emergency room doctor, a woman in New York City who's committed suicide because, you know, and it's not clear why, but it's the same sort of thing. She's been up close and personal with coronavirus. She actually got it herself and recovered. And after her recovery, she committed suicide. So, you know, she obviously had a snootful in the PTSD context. And so I'm going to shut up and let you folks talk about that.
I wanted to add something which is, I think, which connects what Tamara was saying, and even what you were mentioning. So, few years back, I was part of circle of people who who were quite wealthy in their childhood, and so basically they got internet exactly at the same time when it came to India. I got it like 6 years after that. So they got it 6 years before me. Um, uh, and I was terrified in my, like, till my soul, to know that it was very uh, common for them to watch live rape, to watch live, and the obsession was with live, huh? It was not with pedophile like activity, that adultery with children. It was not that. Like, it, of course it was part of it, but for them it was like, oh, we saw live, we know where it was. And like, for them, the way they were interpreting this to me was, is like they had some kind of reach. That is how it was presented. And those were the people who, I keep saying that I have tasted malice and malevolence of society. Like, it touched me. And those were the people who became medium for me to uh, so I've survived because of a lot of people, right? But then there are strong traumas, and those traumas came from those kind of directions. So I'm very conscious about uh, people who possibly might be engaged in all those, because I found them extremely damaging to society, to their own selves, actually. Both, it goes both way. For their own self also, they cannot enjoy intimacy in the way. So things like that. And I think I want to ask Tamara to speak on it, that teenagers or children who grew up, like, uh, playing um, war games. So I collected a lot of toys to distribute among the children. I got like 9 bags of toys, and when I was sorting it out, 2 full bags was guns, which I did not distributed. 2 full, like this big bag, were guns. So what do you think? Like, how do we fix it in the culture? If I may put it that way, like, and where those impulses to giving our children gun is coming from in our uh, consciousness. Yeah.
Well, I just would encourage, a deep breath, maybe putting the hand on the heart, and just
Yeah.
acknowledging that we're in topics that are delicate and painful.
Yeah.
And it's the courage to have these discussions in groups, mixed groups of men and women, that's an honor and a opportunity. But this topic, particularly of sexual violence, is one that really, I think, does need airing. This is a big shadow of our world.
Yeah.
And absolutely, women are not the only victims. I again want to acknowledge that women are not the only victims, but they are disproportionately the victims. And the statistics that we have in the UK, again, I try to go to the science, but often these are topics that the brain can't bear. But it's suggested that 1 in 4 women has had some form of sexual harassment or sexual abuse in their lifetime, and we can imagine that these are underreported figures because of the difficulties of actually talking about that. And I know we have guests from Brazil here as well, and I understand that the figures there are much higher, and perhaps parts of the East and India as well. This culture is very problematic, and that's not even really counting the organized versions of those things.
Correct. Yeah.
So this is heavy shadow.
Mm.
And, you know, the fact that people can survive and even thrive and tell their stories after these sorts of things is, I think, testament to just how incredible human beings are. But I'm, you know, personally very interested in this topic of how do we hold in our mind sight and our heart sight the things that are too difficult to bear. And some of that then might be about feelings of shame or guilt that could be personal, that could be collective, that could be to do with complicity, ignorance, position, you know, luck, all the different things that can happen that mean we don't see, and yet how we can hold this in mind with the fact that it's all over our screens, it's all over the internet, it's easily accessible, and it's actually part of some games that people pay money for and that industries make trillions of dollars from. And, you know, this is a big topic, but, you know, that's an issue in my view.
It certainly is a huge issue. And I think and I'll try to speak for Tim since he's not here. I think in the United States, we suffer this very heavily because of the puritanical influence, the influence of the Puritans, who were among the first European Americans and who were, you know, quite straight-laced and were wacko in their own rights. If we think of the Salem witch trials and that sort of thing, but you know, these were people who left the UK because they were too Puritan and they wanted freedom to teach their approach to religion, and so they went to the Netherlands, and they found the Netherlands too promiscuous, too free. And so after 10 years, they got on the Mayflower and went to Massachusetts, where they were left to incubate for a couple hundred years. And so they, you know, they did spread their, you know, their personal perspective of how one should live their lives. I mean, the type of perspective where a woman who committed adultery had to wear a red A on her dress, and yet, you know, the men, you know, it obviously takes two to tango, and so it was always blamed on the women, and in Muslim countries it still is. I mean, the women are required to wear, in most places, they're required to wear a covering that basically hides their femininity, and you know, they like it because if they even show an ankle, the men who are not sufficiently matured, the young men especially, consider that a license to go rape them. Okay, and so in those countries, they consider it a license to rape a woman if she just shows an ankle. And so we have to come up with some educational process where we understand our sexuality and appreciate it in its fullness, okay, in its fullness and in its reality, and yet we, you know, prevent large-scale abuse in some way, and you know, and there's all kinds of flavors of this, but as a man, I've had enough experiences over a lifetime to know that there's a whole range of this in terms of learning about one's sexuality, starting when I was 5 years old and going forward after that. And we just don't teach young men and young women the right things. And, I remember when I was in the 8th grade, they separated the boys and the girls for health class because they were taking the girls off to tell them the facts of life, but the guys, they were teaching some stupid thing and they weren't even addressing sexuality at all. I never remember a single class in, at my time of growing up. I never remember a single class in middle school or high school that addressed human sexuality at all. Okay, but I'm sure the girls were getting that, but the guys weren't, and so they weren't. We didn't even try to educate them, and so that's a big issue, because I found these things in myself a bit because I experienced a lot of things in Japan, and either directly or indirectly, and those things cooked in my unconscious for 30 years, and then they emerged in this visioning experience I had in 1993, and they emerged in this novel where, there's certain chapters of that novel that are pornographic, and I had no choice. I was having an archetypal possession, and so I had to complete this novel. And then I put it in my drawer for 21 years because I didn't know, what the heck is this saying about me as a man, as a human being. And, obviously a certain amount of guilt in there, the Puritan kind of guilt. And yet then when I started to study Jung, then I was able to get my arms around it a bit better. But we still have a very, very big problem in this. It's just an immense problem, and we don't know how to address it as a society.
Well, but we can go, we can use what we know about the brain, from the science to give us some frameworks and understanding of, what can be happening, particularly when young forming brains are being exposed to violent material or, asked to practice violent things. And, it's just like every kid that watches kung fu movies and thinks they can do the moves. There is a certain truth to that. Actually, your brain is processing the information, and if you make the game more and more real, you're kind of practicing the moves. And my sense of that is it probably does lower the threshold of a kind of more human reactivity that might be there when you did it for real. I think with the young people, my sense is I had, again, in a sort of more archetypal moment, had this sense of the guilt and shame of being in the generation that's actually, well, I think we've harmed the younger people. I think we've harmed younger people with technology, even the ones that are not making the games, because actually our most valuable commodity, attention, has been often on a phone or a computer, perhaps while we're working or trying to multitask, a busy working mum, multitasking with a laptop and all the rest of it. And at the same time, the child's attention is on a iPad or a TV or something that's, acting as a babysitter. And, working with youngsters and young entrepreneurs, I find that they've got some actually incredible executive functioning skills. I mean, the games that they're playing and the tasks they have to do and multiplayer games, they've got these interesting kinds of social skills that come from having a global community that they meet online and they engage with, and they're doing all sorts of problem-solving tasks that they never have a chance to do in real life. But what they're lacking and where they struggle is with the embodied emotional experience. So there's this kind of dissociated sense of, not really labeling emotions in the right way, getting confused about emotions. Our most favorite question in the world as a mindfulness teacher is, and where do you feel that in the body? And the struggle that it is for these youngsters that are used to just having their full attention capture into a screen where everything's highly, highly, highly stimulating. When they're asked to really sink into the body and feel emotions, there's actually almost like a type of training that's needed. And some of that has a flavor of the yang about it. Yeah, a flavor of the yang about it, which is like, no, you didn't just problem solve that emotional thing. You need to sink in a little bit lower and kind of really begin to feel that in the body, and it may be uncomfortable. Now, this example I gave earlier of this man in the office, he was kind of saying, well, what's advice and what tips have you got for me? How can I bring this up the chain and do this pointing, which may be exposing somebody's, lack of paying attention or whatever the version of this was. And, a good metaphor always helps. So I do always suggest that. And creating a safe space for a new type of dialogue is also a good tip. But my other tip was, see if you can get a woman to come in with you. See if you can get a woman to come in and kind of support you with this, because actually women are used to dealing with shame. And he was quite shocked when I said that. He actually said, what?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Okay, I've been a little bit distracted in the last couple of minutes because I've been having a communication with Tim, because Tim has had difficulty getting on today. I think he'll join us here shortly, and I really want his input on this conversation. But
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Okay.
Thank
Where
you.
are-
Thank.
Oh, there you are. You're behind my camera. I apologize. Somehow we had a miscue here, but Tim, I don't know. Jerome, could you give Tim a sort of balanced précis on what we've been discussing, starting with the Puritans and Hester's A and so on, and because that's so important to what we were talking about. Jerome?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was asking you because I was both in the thick of it and then in the thick of trying to bring Tim online, that I'm not the best one to give a balanced précis on what we were talking about, and maybe between you and Tamara or Sandy we can have a balanced précis on so that we can bring Tim up to date and he can make his input here.
Well, from what I've been listening, and I've also been busy back and forth on the technical stuff, but Tamara has been talking about the relationship of the yin and the yang, and how it operates and how we need to, and she also talked about guilt and shame as things that the people are, I think she was referring to the yin aspect. Is that correct, Tamara?
Let me see what you're going to say next, and then I'll tell you if that was, yeah.
Okay, the guilt.
The yang, actually, the yang needs to sink into those emotions. Yin has a different task, which I can get to a bit later. Yeah.
The yang is the male, or you could look at the male energy, and the yin is the female. And so what she's saying is that we need to address just what she said, getting more into the yin focus. And she sees that the yin female energy is coming into focus and play here. At least I think it is. I'll give my opinion. So,
Okay, well, I wanted to go back even further than that because Kushbu brought up some painful topics, Tim, about how men are experiencing actual live rape experiences with in as a kind of entertainment in India, if I follow you correctly, Kushbu. And so we were talking about how we properly educate young people about their sexuality so that we achieve. I mean, this is your favorite topic, it seems to me. So I wanted to have your input on this because, we have this crisis between men and women, actually, and we need to find a way to educate about it properly so that we properly educate young men, but at the same time, and women, about both sides of this story, okay, because men have their story too. And so go ahead, Sandy.
Skip, do you really think that it's a problem of lack of education?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I feel like education can help, and the sort of openness to communicate about it is more important. But okay, go ahead, Kushbu.
I don't think at all that it is a problem of education.
What do you think it's a problem of then?
That I don't know, but I am comparing it from my experience because I always ask this kind of question to know to people, and the only people I found who was, and again this is from my biased experiences, but these people were coming from most posh and I don't know high end schools, and they were, what people I'm talking about were the scientists in making in of India basically, and like 2 years
Well,
back.
I think Skip's talking about sex education, not necessarily just education. But
I mean sex education, and
yeah.
And so, Kushbu, do you feel that Indian men and women are properly educated about the opposite sex and the proper relations between the two? Do you feel that's done at all?
I feel that the question feels like joke to me.
Why?
Because it's non-existing. It's like interaction is not there, and the interaction is celebrated.
Well, and that's the thing. It has to do with the shame, the collective shame in talking openly about sex.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me give you. I want to give you all a short précis on the American experience. This is my great-grandmother on the left, seated, and her four sisters and my great-great-grandfather. And you see that they are dressed essentially the way a Saudi woman would be dressed today. And I know that one of my great-grandfathers, I don't know if this particular one, his name is Josiah Dockstader, but I don't know if Josiah Dockstader was this great-great-grandfather, but I know that one of them never saw his wife without her clothes on in his lifetime.
Yeah. So the use of, the fact that we have to wear clothes in society, and even amongst children and adults and going to work and all of that, that's already a kind of social engineering where you know the skin and the need to see skin and the need to neutralize the continuity of being in a room with people and knowing that your skin is next to another person. This is something that doesn't happen unless you go to like a nudist colony, say. So we've already been designed to feel shame of our body. Even if I were to like be allowed to walk around naked, I still would feel embarrassed about like my belly or my arms or things like that. And I think that this is why you get that return of the repressed in the form of a perversion. And then if you add dominance hierarchy, bullies will bully. If a father is abusing his boy at home, well, when he becomes a teenager, he's not going to be able to confront other males, but he might be able to enjoy watching a man rape a woman, because that's the perverse aspect of the repressed. And so I guess that's kind of my theory of why this happens. And even childhood, with the pedophilia, I mean, even I think that has something to do with it too, because there's not a lot of integration of healthy relationships, and attachment theory will explain that. When a father and a daughter, when your little 6-year-old daughter comes out of the shower and jumps on daddy's lap, daddy might push you away and say, no, that's dirty. I remember when I first came here, and I was here for a couple of years, and my dad finally came to America, and I wanted to sit on his lap. By this time I was 12 years old, and I had shaved my legs, and I was wearing a dress, and he just pushed me off, like, no way. And I wasn't thinking about it in any kind of sexual way, and I don't think he was either, but it's like he's been indoctrinated to think that there has to be this gap, and well, I could say a lot more about it, but that's
okay. Well, here's what I suggest. This is an issue that we cannot resolve today. That's clear, and it's an issue that we probably should revisit, and I welcome that. But I really wanted Tim to talk about his experiences with it, and I want to limit that conversation to 12 minutes from now. So at 1:30, I want to move back to the Mary Magdalene issue, which was where we left off with Tamara last time, and there is a call on the chat asking for us to get back to that issue. So I'd very much like to get back to that issue also. But Tim, would you talk about your experiences as an artist, and particularly your comments about dealing with the nude?
Yeah, it's probably more than we have time for today. And I see that Deborah also brought up the issue of the Puritans that she would like to address. And I think that's a big part of what we're dealing with, is there's a Puritan attitude that somehow has persisted all through the history of American civilization that I think is really unfortunate. And part of the problem is that the advertisers are able to pick up that disgust of the human body and use it for their advantage. And that's one of the reasons why it has become so powerful. I think advertising is really our educational system, because we can never escape it. It is constant throughout our entire lives. And the values that are put forward by the advertisers always have to do with making us feel inadequate with who we are. you know, the worst customer in the world is a happy person, because you can't sell them anything. And this is, I think this is one of the great downfalls of our culture, is that we allow advertisers to make us feel horrid about ourselves. And nothing is more powerful than a person's feeling about their own body. And as a body sculptor, I've been thinking about this stuff, you know, my whole adult life. As I say, it'd be a topic for a different conversation, but I feel that there is not a one of us who is left untouched by the devastation of that kind of emotional travesty. As long as advertising persists in our culture, we are always going to be like Sisyphus, pushing this enormous rock up the hill, and it's always going to be coming back down on us. The only way that I think we can get out from under it is to have a kind of separation from the dominant culture. And this is where I am personally. And as an artist, I've kind of given up on trying to enlighten the collective in terms of the value of the body. What I try to do is to inspire an individual as to the sacred character of their own creation, so that maybe one individual someplace can think about their own body as being created by God and beyond criticism. You know, you're created by God to be exactly the way you are. And that's never going to fit in with the cultural norm or the cultural ideal. But that is no reason to minimize your own value. And as I say, I can go on and on about that.
Yeah, obviously. So it probably should be a topic in its own right at some time soon. But Tamara, we have two issues that have come up. One is that Nancy says she'd really like to hear from you about the yin, since you've talked about the yang, and then we have to get back to this Mary Magdalene issue, which is so central.
Good. Yeah. So again, just inviting a small drop into the body to feel any sensations that are there at the moment. This is our guide. Actually, for me, this is the big data that we all really need to be interested in. And you know, as men and women, we have different experiences of that. You know, at the very least, one thing that came to me when I started meditating and being more embodied just was the range of how the hormonal cycle can change my attentional lens. And I've dialogued a few times with very experienced female Buddhist practitioners who've done long retreats. And one of them said, well, you know, if you want to have this kind of stability of attention that the shamatha training invites you to do for kind of months and months on end, that might be quite difficult if you're trying to do that with a brain that sits within a hormonal system that actually is quite cyclical in ways that can, for some women, you know, really actually disturb their cognition. Now, I'm not saying it makes them better or worse, but there are some realities there, actually, for many women, that the hormones, and any woman that's perimenopausal or had a menopause also maybe knows what this is about. You know, our sense of our body is changing perhaps in much more of a fluid way as a woman. And, you know, of course, I'm mentioning their hormones, menstrual frustration, and this is a source of huge shame. I think in the younger generations less so, which I'm really glad and pleased to hear and see about. But, you know, women of a certain age, you know, we wouldn't talk about this, and maybe mothers didn't even give, you know, helpful information to their daughters about some pretty crucial things that are part of our life as a woman. So, you know, this idea that, you know, the yang task is kind of to get into shame, and for the yin, it's a different movement. Yeah, so it's to release the shame, you know, connecting to our wild woman, maybe Sandy, you know, the one that wants to run naked in the fields and the forest, you know, and be connected to the earth, you know, with every part of the skin. You know, these are the healing tasks of the yin. But if we imagine that the yin yang is turning, you know, this is the releasing of power in the yang and the gaining of power in the yin. Now, here's where I believe potentially something interesting is happening, because this isn't just women acting like men. Yeah, we've kind of done a version of that already. Women were able to do that quite successfully, actually, which is just like shut down your right brain and kind of steel yourself and get in there with the boys and, you know, kind of have balls of steel or whatever is the Wall Street equivalent of that from the 80s and the 90s, these early pioneer sisters that kind of went into the male environments. But my sense now is we're invited to rise into a softer feminine. It's still powerful, but it's a different kind of power. And maybe this is the piece that's more than about what happens when we can make contact with the divine feminine. Yeah, with this feminine energy, it has an endless source of power. It maybe has a cosmological origin, or however you want to kind of describe that. It is perhaps the compassionate energy of Green Tara, Kuan Yin, you know, these archetypal feminine figures that have not only the compassion, but also the steeliness and the sensuality.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating to see just recently on the cable news channels, as they've been talking about coronavirus, that many of the mayors in southern cities are Black women, and they have embodied what you're talking about. Those women have. You know, the mayor of Atlanta, the mayor of Washington, D.C., her name skips my mind at the moment, but the former mayor who, or former police chief, she was a police chief and ended up as a police chief in Miami after 40 years, and is now a U.S. Congresswoman. Her name escapes me at the moment, but anyway, they're very powerful, and yet they're also very feminine and very interesting to watch that change in the way these things are being handled.
But in that moment, female is also invited to look at the feminine sexual shadow. Yeah, so again, I don't want it to make it seem like I'm doing yang bashing or male bashing, because actually sisters have been very brutal to one another as well. And that's often the piece that I'm curious about, is how do we look at the female sexual shadow? And, you know, some of that is, you know, that we have this, you know, whore versus mother kind of conditioning that even, you know, an enlightened woman or a feminist can fall prey to. You know, just because I know about it doesn't mean my brain doesn't still sometimes make the same assumptions. And there's a great woman in the UK, Anita Corbin. She did an exhibition called 100 Firsts. And she did portraiture of women who, it was the first time a woman had that job. So one was like the first female director of the Royal College of Physics, and one was the first lieutenant commander of a battalion of more than 50,000 troops. One was a magician, one was a swimmer, one was the first woman that rode the Atlantic. And even when I was looking at the works, you know, I saw the picture of this young female lieutenant that was in the army. And the first thought I had was like, oh my God, she looks young. And then I was like, wow, wow, I shocked myself actually. Luckily, with the mindfulness skills, I caught the thought. Yeah. But you know, even myself with practice, with awareness, with curiosity, with interest in kind of female narratives and stories, my mind still had this response, like, and I would never have that response if it was a picture of a man, right? I would, you know, so it's fascinating to me that we
I have
have
an
this
example
such
for this.
strong, yeah, go,
I have an example for same thing. So
yeah, go.
I'm a social worker, and I've struggled um, coming across like goofy, bubbly type of, and it is a bad thing for my job. So I used to wear like proper salwar kameez and proper bindi and just to look older. Like I've tried everything because I know I get judged because of it. So yeah, yeah, I've done
But this
that.
is also, yeah, but we talked about clothes, didn't we? And Sandy brought this. And again, this is part of
Yeah,
the feminine sexual shadow, because
yeah.
we know how to use this because it works. Because sex sells, and sex is a powerful commodity to direct attention, to manipulate. Yeah, I'm not saying this is right, but if we're talking about sex rather than sensuality, this is a way that women have had to use their bodies and their looks and their clothes, and they put the boobs up like this for the job interview. You know, let's talk about it. Let's name it. Yeah, it's not
No,
skillful,
for
but it's a
India, because
way
it's
to
in India.
try
For
to
me, it's for
redress.
other. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or
It was
whatever is the
other
culturally
way.
appropriate thing.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to go to the sensuality, and I'm going to share my screen and just share a book that really has impacted, which I sent to you, is Embrace of the Daemon, Healing Through the Subtle Energy Body. You know this book, maybe?
I'm sorry, Tamara, you were a bit attenuated there. Could you repeat about the last two sentences you're about to go into, and then...
Yeah, so the book that I really recommend, which is again looking more at feminine sensuality, which I think this move from sexuality to sensuality is important, because that will allow us to access the energy of the divine feminine, yeah, which is more than sex, which is more than sexuality. Yeah, it is this kind of different sort of power, I believe. And it requires the feminine to move into this position of body confidence that's more than looks, body confidence in the energy of the body, confidence in the healing energy of the hands, of the heart, of this deep, deep, deep compassion that is the maternal. There's a maternal quality to it. But this book, it's from kind of a Jungian series. It's by Sandra Dennis. Embrace of the Demon, Healing Through the Subtle Energy Body, Jungian Psychology in the Dark Feminine. And, you know, the topics are pretty juicy, I have to say, when you're reading it. But this is how to go into the archetypal space of the feminine sensuality, you know, which includes some pretty challenging material. But actually, in my own experience, has been very helpful to explore sexual shadow on multiple levels. And, you know, it's through this process, I think, that we can then begin to access, you know, some of the things that Nancy spoke about. You know, there was maybe a very different sense of what is a God type experience in the body. When you maybe had that experience of connecting to the divine feminine or goddess energy, or, you know, different traditions refer to it as different things. And I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that or come in on that, but
Give us the
Yeah.
name of that book again.
yeah, I'll find it for you. Go ahead, Tim. Yeah. Feel something? Very lost. Yeah. That's it. That's the one, yeah.
Ah, Damon
Yeah.
healing through the, okay.
And one thing that caught my eye there, actually, the other book that's inspired me a bit around that and doing the healing of the darker side of the feminine is Marion Woodman. Marion Woodman, presumably people are familiar with her work. The Ravished Bride is a particular one. I work a lot with that, with eating disorders and kind of thinking about those more toxic maternal lines and the, you know, the damage that women do to one another. This is part of our shadow too. And the complicity sometimes as well is a tough one to look at. But going deep into this more sensual question, I think is going to be key to unlocking some of that. And then that is about how do we educate young men, you know, about relationships, maybe rather than sex education, about, you know, how to relate intimately, you know, rather than, as we'd say in England, like have a shag, or, you know, whatever your slang vernacular is for that. Yes, another book, yeah, and Clarissa Pinker's Estes, of course, is a great resource as well for looking at some of the different ways of looking at the female archetypes as well.
Yeah, that's where
Fishbone.
that's where I got into trouble because it was reading her book that constellated my visionary experience, right? And so when I wrote my novel, I wrote it primarily using the template of Vasilisa the Wise, the doll in her pocket, Vasilisa the Wise, which starts on page, it's either page 74 or page 94. I probably can tell you because it's within my arm's reach always. But after that story, she has sort of the 9 psychological accomplishments that a woman needs to go through to activate her intuition and her power, right? And my novel is about a girl who's 15, who's sold by her father to pay a debt and becomes the first woman prime minister of Japan. And so she has to go through these stages. And actually, Deborah Stevens is the only human being on the planet that ever wrote a review of my book on Amazon. So maybe you should comment on it, Debbie. We have to unmute you. Go ahead now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Skip. That was really my, I met you in person and you mentioned your book, and then I immediately read it. And as you know, I felt very bad that here this book has been out all this time and there was not one review on there. And of course, for those, Tamara doesn't know my background, but I'm a writer, editor, journalist, publisher with a degree in psychology. So kind of apples and oranges, I guess. But I read it and was fascinated by it. I also saw where your plot and your was very similar to a book that had became very, now that's the book that I live by. Yes, all of us thumbs up here. Mary Magdalene definitely could run with wolves, but they don't go that far back, but she definitely could. But in Skip's case, he wrote the book very much from a woman's point of view, which is fascinating. But there was a very popular book called Memories of a Geisha.
Memories of a Geisha, yeah.
Yes, who was, which I had read many years ago. And the book became an extreme overnight bestseller and also became a movie. And when I read Skip's book, his plot dealing with the geisha and dealing with the raw-ish sexual aspects, dealing with the emotional aspects in both the male and the female, which I haven't heard Skip talk about that much, but he also gave the very strong emotional of the both yin and yang, Tamara, because he was giving, it was basically told from the woman's point of view, but also her, the men that were in her lives. There were there were like sneak peeks of what they were feeling, and the men who loved her and the military officer who loved her. But I thought it was so unfair that his book was so far superior to Memories of a Geisha, and yet it was the same plot. And I thought, how did this happen?
Well, I know how it happened, Deborah, because he took
I
the
also
idea
know how
from
it
me.
happened.
He took the idea from me. Okay, very simply.
So you knew the writer of that?
No, but I know that he got the idea of writing his book from my
Reading
book.
your book.
From reading my book. Okay.
Because I highly, highly recommend this book for women in view of what I read it in like 4 or 5 days. I mean, it's 70, 80,000 words. I mean, it's
Oh, it's 100,000 words.
But you just, you know, there's some books that you want to read and savor, and there's some books you just have to gulp and go through them. And I highly recommend, there's some very, very raw, very horrible rape scenes and the way women are abused during this time frame in Japan, which they may still be, the geisha's still there, but it gives you all sides of it. And the fact that a man wrote it surprised me, and I didn't know Skip very well then. And I know a little more about him now, not much. And we only met last year.
Well, let me just say that the scenes that are in my book are mild by comparison to what would actually happen.
Wow. That
way mild.
surprises me.
I want to say something here.
Yeah, go ahead, Kushbu.
So, you know, Gandhiji had one problem. And when they used to cover him in media of that time, they used to say that and the same thing Friedrich Nietzsche also faced, is that people who understood him knew that they are too ahead of their time, you know, and no wonder people were not able to like interpret and make sense of what they're like. It's like justified innocence of people almost, it feels like. So yeah, I feel I will be privileged to read that. Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely going to check that out, because you know the yin yang balanced male is like thumbs up. Yeah, this is every woman's dream, right? Is to have this yin yang balanced
Tamara,
male.
it's free on the, let's see, on the general Dropbox. Okay, there's a PDF of it. Get it for free.
But you know, how do we support, I guess, you know, men to kind of move to this position and females to kind of wisely move into the power position? And I think the piece that's coming out again, speaking to a lot of women, is this sense there is a kind of a rising anger, the anger of the oppressed. And how to wisely manage that energy, I think is really going to be important. And, you know, I work a lot with techpreneurs and particularly women in VR, women in augmented reality. And these are women, they're in their kind of late 30s, 40s, mid 40s, you know, they're kind of developing businesses, they've got the money to do it. But their workforce is these 24, 25-year-old males. And from a sexual energy point of view, this is like ripe for disaster, basically, and a kind of replication of something of the abuse dynamics that happened, you know, in the old days, right? Old guy, young secretary, you know, power dynamics, sexual energy. And now it's the reverse, you know, the kind of maturation of the female sexual energy at that age mixed with the kind of yang energy of the 23-year-old. And it's, you know, it's kind of fascinating to see how some of those dynamics are playing out. And some of it is quite unconscious revenge dynamics. Yeah, this idea that, well, now I can do to you what you did to me, sort of, it's not ever really overt or that explicit, but there's definitely a flavor of that there. So I do kind of caution in that, you know, the rise of the feminine energy, the position of women, and how this is particularly playing out in the tech sector, but managing that righteous anger, channeling that strong, compassionate energy, strong energy. Actually, I think it's right and ripe for our times, when I think there is a need for feminine leadership to just say, no, stop, it's not okay. And how do we mature through that to get back to that position where we can really genuinely be together? So men over here doing their shame healing, probably in men's groups, women over here learning how to really tap into this power and be angry, because it's kind of mostly we're not allowed, but to be angry, but to work through that in our separate ways, maintaining the thread, but then after that, working through, really coming back to a balanced position, both internally and kind of between us, as men and women. And, you know, that's kind of the vision.
Why do you say angry?
Well, I think it's the anger of a collective oppression. You know, that sense of the wrongs that have been done to women over millennia. And again, many of my friends and colleagues sort of suddenly having this understanding of like how many women were killed during the witch trials, you know, worldwide. Let's go to the history, let's go to the stats, and people going like, what?
Yeah, well, in the US it was 19, but obviously there were many more through the Middle Ages and so on.
And something.
Well, I think you also have to think about the men that you're talking about that haven't dealt with their feminine side, how they react to anger from a woman. How do you think they're going to react to it? And I think that's
with aggression. Yeah.
It's a
tough one.
It's a very good point as to how do you approach them in that manner so that they don't do that, and you can facilitate some sort of a change or a communication about it, not from anger.
Well, I think I go to my Kung Fu teachers, of course, for most of my most wise learning. And one of them, you know, he said, you know, he trains in Ying. And, you know, he did a classic Kung Fu journey, like hard styles, Kung Fu, lots of punching and kicking and the hard conditioning. But actually unlocking the real power was when he went to the softness and the softening of the body in Tai Chi. And actually the efficiency of working energetically comes when we're not with big muscles. Yeah, he actually says, I really regret all those years I was doing this conditioning and building big muscles, because now I want the energy and the chi to flow through my body unimpeded. So I need the softness. So he wears like a pink shirt, he wears pink Crocs. We have this joke, like we need to give the men this Mulan fan, which is a kind of fan with like feathers on the end of it, and the sword for the women. Yeah, and I play with this with my students. Let me test your ego. Like, oh, you want to train weapons? Yes, you can come and train weapons with me, no problem. Like, for the men, here you go, the pink fan. Let me see what this internal structure is like. Can you take this instruction from the feminine?
So I think the feminine, which you are talking about, the softness, the aesthetic, and the feather-like characteristic of it, you know, light. It's almost can fly. So
but it's to
anger
let the energy
damaging.
flow.
Anger is
damaging
to that softness. the anger which is very obvious, very genuine maybe, but it anger as a nature of whatever that energy is damaging to the softness which you are giving to your other male students. It is damaging. That is that. And I while you speak about it, it is just becoming very alive to me that, yeah, the damage is being very alive to me of
Yeah.
that anger.
Right. There's an
This-
interesting comment here on the YouTube chat. Let me just read it from Ozymandias, who says, for that balance to not follow the habitual pendulum we have gone through so many times, both men and women will need to have enough self-control to not make this change about revenge, because I am not responsible for oppression that I did not cultivate. Anger is destructive, though, and so that's what he said.
Yeah.
Well, and again, to work through it, I mean, you know, and sometimes I'm teaching boxing to women, and I mean, the fact that they're allowed to have a bit more yang in the system often is very, very healing for them. And a sense of being allowed to work through being a bit more aggressive. It's not necessarily to stay in that state, and that's the trick, right? Don't get stuck in the shame, don't get stuck in the anger, but feel to heal.
May I say
Heal.
something?
And you know, repressed anger is also dangerous in my view. Yeah.
I have in my notes here that Joss didn't get a chance last time, and she really wanted to say something before, and so we have to give Joss a chance here.
Well, well, anyway, there was a lot I wanted to say. But I'm not going to give a long litany here. I usually, my style is to just get right to the point and like PowerPoint it. Tamara, thank you so much. I wanted to say, thank you so much for joining us in this group. It just really adds more richness to our conversations. And what I'm so delighted is that you take a very holistic approach in your healing therapy. There's not too many of us that have a holistic approach, and that you understand also the spiritual side as well as the conventional side, and you blend it all together. I also want to mention, since we're talking about yin and yang, there's a point that I use in it's all about relationships and one-on-one, and that's how we heal the world. Like Mother Teresa was asked by a reporter, how shall we heal the world? How shall we make the world better? And her response to the reporter was, go home and hug your family. So in other words, it begins from home, or it begins from your closest relationships that you have. We can't really change the world. A simple saying is, wear your slippers instead of trying to carpet the world. So we start by trying to center ourselves in the center of love. And there's another common saying that I like by Corinthians 16:14, let all that you do be done in love. So whenever we have certain emotions that come up in our being, because we're all humans, we try to ask ourselves the inner question. We go inward and ask, how would the goddess handle that? Or how would the goddess decide on what to do? Or how would the God for man handle this? So we always kind of try to center ourselves in a center of peace and stillness. So if we are angry, let's identify that emotion, sit back for a while, take a little break, reboot, and then approach our loved ones in a kind and gentle, compassionate manner. That's it.
Tamara, do you feel we've addressed the Mary Magdalene issue? I don't think we have, so we have to come back to that.
But I just want to pick up on Jerome's point, because that flows on from that, which is, and you know, can we have the male that can hold the female anger? Because there is that piece there of being able to sustain that. And those that are therapists in the room, of course, know that that's one of our key tasks often, which is, I can hold your anger. I'm not afraid of your anger. I can be with your anger and allow it to be, you know, impacting me, but I'm still here. And, you know, this is the parenting task as well, isn't it? I'm still here with the angry teenager, with the angry 2-year-old. I'm still holding with this basket of love, even though it's difficult and I'm not coping myself. But, you know, that's the task. Can we hold the rage? Can we hold the anger? Can we hold the shame for one another? You know, and love is the basket there. And you know, where do we tap into that? And yeah, back to the Mary Magdalene. I mean, I'm not an expert on this. I must say, there's probably people in the group that can speak more to this. But I mean, I guess, you know, somebody I spoke to today said she was coming off a Zoom call today, supporting sex workers through COVID. And I mean, I was just so touched by that. I just thought, wow, you know, these are people that are not going to be able to not go to work, right? And they're doing often vital work in our society. And we're at high risk of physical health and mental health and all sorts of issues. And how is it for those people? I mean, I make an assumption it was women. I mean, of course, there are male sex workers as well, but it was a woman I was talking to. And, you know, what is the depth of understanding of the human experience and limitations of these women? Incredible, must be. You know, they've literally seen it all.
Right. And here's Mirtas has shared with us an image from BTS, believe it or not. And I mean, I'm sure all of us will believe it, but this is Jimin in his fan dance, so-called. I don't know.
Yes, that's like a Mulan fan. That's great. Great. Yeah, the young people are not afraid of this topic, right? I mean, again, they've almost taken it a bit too far, some of them, but they're a different understanding.
So, Mirtas, did you want to comment on that? Because I stole your thunder here.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, I don't have much to say. Just that when Tamara mentioned that the men should try to wear pink, and I remember that Boy With Love BTS music video where they are all in pink, and that they can use bright colors, pink clothes, pink hair, blue hair, be very colorful and wear makeup. They are also, they can pull out the all male mannish clothes, I mean suits and etc. They are not afraid to go to wear women's clothes. They buy clothes made for women and they use them, and they wear men clothes.
One of the things that I have loved about BTS is watching the videos online of he-men watching a BTS video for the first time. It's totally hilarious.
Yes.
What's striking about that image is the image before that was he was in a dark shroud under his shadow, and he unveils himself, and that's what you see there with the.
Mhm.
He's dawn. It's dawning on him about reality, I guess. But it's really amazing. So if you're not familiar with the VTS, it's easy to find the videos. Just type VTS. So,
Well, I mean, some of these are, I mean, like, you know, I don't necessarily want to say occult rituals, but, you know, they're part of a kind of ritualistic ways of exploring mind and shadow and kind of light and dark, you know, and again, maybe we can go back to the Mary Magdalene topic again, because that's you know, it's the shadow side of our human experience. And you know, I guess thinking of the Christian traditions, it's like, oh, well, I don't know. I'm keen to hear from others that are more experienced, maybe with those
I'd love to
practices or
hear.
traditions. Nancy.
I'd love to hear Nancy's comments here.
Well, I've just enjoyed listening so much, Tamara. It's been just a delight to have you get into the divine feminine and to flesh it out and to get into sensuality. There's so much I've written down, and I've got that book. I ordered it already. Or no, I got it on my Kindle while you were talking. So I've just been very blessed. I don't know in what context Mary Magdalene has come up, so I'm not sure how to comment on it.
Yeah.
Well, this is almost like the you know, the unexpected teacher, right? Or, you know, the woman behind the man, you know, kind of idea, and sort of surprising about who can be the teacher, and the sense of the flawed teacher. You know, how can this person be the one that teaches us? Again, a micro sharing. I learned Kung Fu when I spent some time in Australia, and I went to the gym, and I didn't quite know where the class was. And I saw this Chinese looking guy coming through the door, and he was like slightly pot bellied, and he sort of had one eye that looked a bit funny. And I was catch my mind, right? I was thinking like, that can't be him, right? That can't be him. And then, of course, lo and behold, it was. And he was, you know, he worked in the laundry, but he was like this amazing Kung Fu teacher. But if you looked at him, you just walk straight past him. And, you know, if you had this assumptions of what a teacher should be like, you would have missed this gem. You would have missed this gem, and, you know, just incredible. But who are our teachers? And if we go back, maybe even we dialogued about this once on the text skip, you know, to this teachings of Egyptian Thoth. Thoth gave the knowledge to the world, but actually it was his female companion that was feeding it to him. Mm-hmm. So there's a sort of a parallel there about, you know, the divine feminine kind of feeding the knowledge to the masculine, and this working together, but with different roles to access and to share knowledge. Version of that happening in business too. Many women say, well, I'm sure I said that out loud, but, you know, when Bob said it, it became a thing. But like when I said it, nobody was listening, and I didn't get my idea. But you know, yeah. So it's a pattern that repeats. But to change that, then for me, for the rise of the feminine, and I go to medicine now, I go to healing traditions now, I go to energy work now, which is, you know, how do we get an integral healthcare system that values the masculine and the feminine healing capacity? Because the feminine healing capacity is here. It's in our hands. It's in touch. It can be in the energetic work. And we're not always comfortable to talk about this because it was something that was suppressed and pushed down, you know, and the herbs and the witchy stuff, you know, the witchy knowledge, you know, and maybe we need some of this back now, but it's not a commodity that you can make a business out of, right? And it comes from a different kind of source, and it's not like for randomized controlled trials. And you can't really make money out of it. So it's, for me, it's fascinating, this process. But yeah, what is the healing? Who is the teacher? What are the expectations and the assumptions we make about that? And how can we just do it a bit differently, I suppose? And I think we've got a chance now. We really got a chance. I mean, I'm seeing all these Tai Chi teachers online. They're teaching massage. They're teaching practices that are about saying, this is your healing modality here, right? Touch your body. Feel your muscles regularly so you can understand when something doesn't feel right. Massage your tummy every day. There's this Kung Fu practice. Massage your tummy every day. And the mom does this, right? Stroking the tummy of the baby, feeling the body of the child. And Sandy's point, well, suddenly we're not allowed to touch kids. No, we're not allowed to touch ourselves. Oh God, you're not allowed to hug the patients. No, you mustn't hug the patients. That's not okay. And it's like, this is a human being that's suffering. Like, even with my British conditioning, I want a hug.
Yeah.
And Brazil, I go to get hugs there, actually. I love this Brazilian culture of very tactile. And I'm sorry that you're in this process, my dear, of not being able to touch and hug and those things, because I know my Brazilian colleagues are really, really feeling this. Not everybody, but many of them, because it's so healing. It's so healing.
Yeah, Sandy has made a comment here which deserves to be addressed, which is, my dad made a movie about a prostitute and now a book about one who changes. It really bothers me that he's so preoccupied by this theme.
Well, that's all I have to say about that.
I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about. Can you elaborate?
Well, he had made a movie in 2005 and about a prostitute that had contracted the HIV virus and was spreading it to men on purpose. And the name of the movie is called Poison Woman. And so I edited this movie and, was just wondering, why he was so preoccupied by this, being so religious now. He didn't used to be really religious. And then now he's making a movie about writing a book about a prostitute that sort of like goes back to like her religion. And all I'm saying is that it's like, I don't know what to say about it, but it just bothers me that he's preoccupied by this theme of a prostitute, and it just evolves in his psyche and his writing.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of themes there for me, right? I don't know the man, but well, it's for me that's about women's sexuality, yeah.
Sorry, can you talk a little bit about the theme of the prostitute? What do we mean by that? Like, what do we mean by that? Like, we have a general perception, sure, but like, you guys are pretty experienced people, so I would like to hear.
I'm sorry, so what was your question?
The theme.
The theme.
Not related to a movie, but a theme, a prostitute.
Yeah.
So what do we mean by that?
Well, my dad, we got in this little spat a couple of years ago when I made a sarcastic comment about how women, one day civilization will allow women to have 4 husbands. It was a play on how in Islam men can have 4 wives. And I've been married in the past, and I've had an analysis, and then I've been, so there's people in my life that have felt like, are forever I'm attached to. So I was having an argument with my dad about this, and I made this comment like, well, one day women can have, and I know that was a jab of sorts, but he called me a prostitute. And well, we really have not spoken since, and it's been another 2 years, because I was just so shocked at that, like when a father says that. And then I realized, oh my gosh, this guy's just preoccupied with this, because his movie, and then saying this to me, and then another one, it's like, is his animal like a prostitute? Like, what is it? And he's got this like mother, my grandmother, who was like this, theologian who studied the Quran like every day and had a following and had, she just was so, anti-sexuality, so I feel like it's, his mother's shadow casted upon him, and he's trying to work it through, and obviously his anger at women, and for like, my mother like leaving Iran and me leaving Iran, and that power, and the fact that we may have gone to the West where, we're going to be devoured by vultures and turned into sexual objects. He had these wild, terrible fantasies of what could happen to us here in America. I don't know, but
Sandy, I wonder if it's not time.
Now you, Skip, and now you. I found out you wrote a book about a prostitute too.
Right, and so did Esther Harding. Here it is, The Way of All Women. Okay, The Way of All Women by Esther Harding. It's it's a classic, and she was a first generation Jungian, and you can find the electronic version of it in the Dropbox, I believe. I'm pretty sure of it. I have, this is my second copy I've bought used. The first copy I gave to Lana when she was leaving after her second visit to the United States. And one of the things that Esther Harding says here is that the Heitada, the so-called Heitada, the prostitute, or if you wish to apply it to Mary Magdalene, is an archetypal aspect of femininity, and so maybe it's time for us to stop pointing fingers so much at Islam and Muslim men, because there's a reason why men had more women in Islam, and it had to do with there were no social services in the Saudi desert or in the Arabian Peninsula. There were certainly none before. I don't know. I don't even know if they're really there now. But the point was that the Prophet, peace be upon him, his perspective created a type of man that wanted to go out and conquer the world. And the result of that was that a lot of men didn't come back. And so there were so many women who were left without any means of support. And we're talking about the last 3,000 years now, so we're not talking about just now. And, on the other end, what Islam requires, as I understand it, is that one must treat all the wives equally. Okay, and what I have noted from my own travels in Saudi Arabia is that, sometimes the women like it, that there's other women, so that to share the various duties of wife, and also it can be hell on earth if you're a man married to more than one woman. I've actually physically observed this in my career. And I've observed both things. And so what we need to understand is how it came to be that Muslim men could have more than one woman. And well, I don't know, I sort of lost track,
Yeah,
but the
that's a whole other
Haytara
topic.
is an archetypal thing, you know, in our psyches, whether we like it or not. It's nonetheless there.
Well, you could go to a sort of Darwinian argument there as well, right? Around reproductive success and multiple mates and kind of the biggest ape having multiple partners, those sorts of things. But I suppose for me, the invitation now in this time of change is an evolution of consciousness to something that's beyond our more primitive,
I mean, surely,
and our more conditioned.
You know, surely the German men, the German young men that fought in World War II were the young sons of women who, after World War I, after 4 million German men had been killed, you know, not every woman had a husband that produced a son in Germany after World War I, right? And so, you know, there are certain realities about, you know, the way history has evolved that both men and women have had to deal with. And, you know, the women of Germany in the 1920s, you know, recreated the country basically. Okay, because those young men that fought in World War II, they didn't come from nowhere. They came from somewhere.
Yeah, that's a really great topic. You know, the role of war in the changing of the yin and yang dynamics. I mean, in the UK experience was, you know, the munitions workers and the women going out to work, and I mean, you know, the use of sexual violence in war is, I mean, this is horrendous things, but you know, there is still something about that physical dynamic and the vulnerability. And one of the young men I was working with once said, "Can a woman ever feel safe? Can a woman ever feel safe?" And, you know, this is about this fear of penetration, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, and it was a great question actually from a young mind who was really trying to grapple with some of these issues and the collective shame of the masculine, and wanting to have a sense of his own connection to the divine goddess.
Meanwhile, can a warrior ever forgive himself?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why all these young veterans are committing suicide, because they can't forgive themselves. And they can't cope with it, with the shame and the guilt. And you know, we learn about these things in very gross ways. I mean, by gross, I mean in the context of world wars. You know, Nietzsche knew that the society of the Victorian era, which didn't happen in Germany, wasn't called that in Germany, but he knew that culture was morbid at the end of the 19th century, and it's still largely morbid today, because we don't address the real issues. We let religious leaders sell us propaganda rather than address the real issues. And so we really have to, we do have to face these issues, and this has been quite a conversation, I must say. We need to wrap it up though, because we've been at it for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I don't think we're going to find a solution anytime soon. But
just stay with the uncertainty, stay in the mess of it a bit longer. We don't have to solve.
Well, we have
everybody.
to stay. We have to stay in the mess of it, and we have to let Tamara go. But Tamara, thank you so much for your conversation with us today. And Tim, did you have any more thoughts that you wanted to add here?
Well, no, but I hope we can take up some of these issues again, like the Mary Magdalene subject. I think we haven't really discussed yet.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the conversation, and Tamara, thank you for being part of this.
And you know what I would say is that if Nancy feels up to it, we could ask her to sort of lead a conversation on that. But I don't know if
I don't know that that's my forte.
maybe
but I could make some comments, but that would be my contribution.
Well, maybe you can point us to someone else that can also be featured and address these kinds of topics.
I'll think about it.
Yeah. And Walter Wiseman here on the YouTube chat says to Sandy, please forgive your dad and get in touch with him again. You might understand him better then and probably even help him to do this himself. Otherwise, it might remain unsolved for you. And Sean Steele says, always ask the question, what is possible when you're confronted with evil? And, those are very good points. So Thursday, 2 days from now at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. in Helena, Montana. We are having, and 10 a.m. in Reno. We are having, and 7 a.m. in Hawaii. We are having a discussion about imagination of evil with Liliana Wapha, with the help of Mirtas, I hope, because Dr. Wapha says she's not confident about her English, and I did notice that in this book, her.
I bet her English is better than mine.
Yeah, that's what I think too. But at the same time, her essay in this book is translated, and the name of the translator is listed in the book. But anyway, 1 p.m. And if you don't have the link for Thursdays, it's the Thursday link you'll need. Please get in touch with me. And having said all that, Kushbu, can you calm us down a little bit here? I was going to give you my version of it the other day when you and I were only talking the other day.
Stage is yours then today.
Well, maybe I won't do it all, but I'll do one verse if that's okay for you.
The first one, and then I take over?
If you're okay with that.
I'm inviting you.
Okay. All right. So let's take an attitude of prayer. Jerome, what did you want to say?
Let's all take 2 deep breaths this time.
Yeah, let's take 2 deep breaths and forgive Skip for murdering this. Okay, I'll take the first verse. Om Loki Samasa Sukino Bhavantu
Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. God bless you, everybody. Yoda loved
Bless
it.
you. I only messed it up a little bit, but thank you for.
No, nobody can mess this up. I promise you that.
And thank you to the dogs and the cat that was here with us as well.
Well, he's Yoda. He's Yoda.
Yeah. Okay, so peace. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Ta-da, ta-da.
Bye-bye.